If you were to have a conversation with someone in this fandom, inevitably the word favourite will enter the discussion. What's your favourite toy? What's your favourite comic? What's your favourite show? Now, if you were to ask me, I think for most things, that would be a hard question to answer. Take R.I.D. Scourge, for example. For nearly a whole decade, I would have said that there was no question that that was my favourite toy. A few years ago, I got rid of it, sold it without hesitation. And now I would genuinely struggle to answer that question. But there is one question for which the answer has never changed. What is your favourite episode of Transformers? And that episode is the subject of today's video. Today, we're talking about the Season 2 Generation 1 episode, War Dawn. A brief disclaimer before we start. Nostalgia is a powerful thing, and I know that trying to be objective in the face of nostalgia is a recipe for disaster. I'm not going to try. There will be times in this video that you will probably say to yourself, David, you're reaching there, like, I probably am. But it's my video, so there. Growing up in the UK in the late 80s was a challenge if you were, like me, a fan of the Generation 1 cartoon. You speak with most fans of my age, they'll normally tell you that they grew up reading the comics from Marvel. And there's no surprise there. They were on the shelf every week with new stories that fleshed out the world of the robots in disguise. But the cartoon was a different case entirely. Not only was it near impossible to find a TV station that carried Transformers on a regular basis, but you also had to compete with the other 300 cartoons that were on at the same time, vying for your attention. So how did we consume Transformers? For example, I don't have a single memory of reading a Transformers comic book as a kid, nor do I really have any recollection of watching it on TV until the reruns in the early 90s as Generation 2. No, if I wanted to watch Transformers, I had to watch it on VHS. For context, by the end of the 1980s, there was less than 20 episodes of the first 2 seasons that had been released on home video in the UK. Most of those usually contained 2- and 3-parter episodes, so it's pretty fair to say that the pickings were meagre. But it did mean that when a new tape arrived, it would be an event. The vast majority of the episodes that were released on VHS are some of my favourites. Episodes like The Key to Vector Sigma, Arrival from Cybertron, and of course, War Dawn. On the surface, there's a lot about this episode that shouldn't work for me. To this day, I can't even tell you which of the aerial bots is which, with the exception of Silverbolt and Slingshot because of this very episode. So the fact that this is a spotlight on them should be an immediate no-go. Also, this video came as part of a double bill with The Key to Vector Sigma, which just so happened to introduce my favourite combiner team of all time, the Stundercons. Before I start talking about the episode proper, I do just want to spend a few moments talking about the writer of this episode, David Wise. If you don't know that name, you'll surely know his legacy. Not only did David pen more Generation 1 episodes than anybody else, but following on from Transformers, he would end up being the head writer on a little show called I say this with no hyperbole, but I truly believe without his contribution to this franchise, there's a very, very good chance that I would not be a Transformers fan to this day. The episodes he wrote and the lore he injected into this franchise, from the Key to Vector Sigma, the Plasma Energy Chamber, and even Crimzeek, have become staples of the franchise for nearly 4 decades. He is my favourite Transformers writer, and for everything that I've been able to do in this fandom as part of it, I owe him an immense debt. Transformers the movie is often praised by fans because, unlike the TV show, it's got genuine stakes. Within the first 5 minutes of the film, characters we've known, characters we've spent time with over the last 2 seasons, are dead. Well, before Transformers the movie came along, there was War Dawn. The episode is as mature as it comes, tackling themes such as growth through tragedy, the consequences of one's actions, and let's be honest, just how cool Optimus Prime really is. If you've not seen this episode, and why haven't you, it's literally free to watch here on YouTube, I'll give you a brief rundown, but for full context, I highly recommend watching this episode before listening to the rest of this video.
Suggestion noted and ignored!
So thanks to the arrival of the aerial bots, Megatron's air supremacy is threatened, and so he traps them, intending to send them back to the beginning of time. However, thanks to an intervention on Optimus Prime's behalf, destroying the time machine, they end up in the golden age of Cybertron and get to witness firsthand the start of the Great War. The first thing that jumps out at me with this episode is its structure, which, for a 22-minute cartoon, is normally pretty well established. The Decepticons launch a dastardly plot, the Autobots get wind of it, something happens to place the Autobots at a disadvantage, but they rally together and save the day. Now, I'm not saying this always happens. Heck, even as I say this, I'm thinking about times that it didn't. But for the most part, that's the standard episode. War Dawn says no to the standard format in a way that I really appreciate. First of all, it's refreshing that the Decepticons have got more than one evil plot in motion at any one time. At the beginning of the episode, they're kidnapping world leaders, while Megatron is building a time machine with a plan to go back in time and steal resources. Repurposing the time machine into a trap for the aerial bots is a spur-of-the-moment decision by him, and he actually succeeds in doing it, and then the Decepticons are actually run off by the end of Act 1. When we finally catch up with them in Act 3, now Megatron and the Decepticons are on the wrong foot. They realise the damage that could be caused by the Autobots if they had access to time travel. As such, it's Megatron who's looking for a way to win the day, with the help of a Guardian robot. And while this ultimately proves to be futile, it is nevertheless a great inversion of the status quo, and it goes a really long way to giving this episode such rewatchability. And everything that I've just really talked about there is the B plot of the episode, and while all that's going on, the aerial bots are coming to terms with the consequences of their naivete. I don't want you to come away thinking that I just like it because of the structure. It's the message this episode sends. It's packed full of lore, beautiful character moments, and shocks that help cement this as one of the best. So, to do that, let's talk about my least favourite combiner team, the aerial bots. It has only been in recent years that we've gotten to see what Transformers are like when they're young. Prior to the inclusion of the aerial bots in the Generation 1 series, Bumblebee was considered the young one. But that's young in relative terms. After all, he's still millions of years old and has already experienced war. The aerial bots, by the time this episode starts, have only been online for several weeks, and with that youth comes an experience. Now, the aerial bots have had their dealings with the Decepticons in the past. Heck, they've even questioned their allegiances and ultimately sided with the Autobots.
Come on, we got Stunticons to pound.
So why does this concept work a second time? I think it's crucial to pay attention to who the aerial bots are actually interacting with. Starscream, the Deceiver. Often our ideas or values can be undermined by somebody who's just cooler than us, wittier than us, seemingly smarter than us. Even at the beginning of this episode, after Starscream has tried to murder people by dropping them out of a plane at 20,000 feet, the aerial bots still defend him, wondering if it was perhaps an accident. Incidentally, dropping a bunch of humans out of an aircraft at 20,000 feet is the darkest thing that Starscream has ever done, right?
There's only one way to get those aerial bots off our tails, and that's to dump the chumps!
The hostages! We gotta save them!
This is no different to us trying to rush to the aid of a celebrity online. We don't know these people, but they just have a quality about them that we appreciate, and therefore couldn't imagine that they would do anything bad. It also doesn't help that the aerial bot's resident big mouth Slingshot is the one most vocal about giving the cons a chance. With the exception of Silverbolt, you feel like the other three are just getting dragged along thanks to peer pressure. But at least it does give Slingshot a personality. So even after Megatron traps them in the past, they still look to have a relationship with him, because they've not seen the mask slip yet. They've not seen what their peers have seen. And so we, as the viewer, get to witness what is, to my mind, perhaps the most brutal moment in Transformers cartoon history. Now I can hear you saying it already, yeah but David, Transformers the movie is darker. But consider for a moment, when Megatron guns down Orion Pax and Ariel, he's not gunning down hardened soldiers like what we got in the shuttle at Transformers the movie. He's gunning down a humble dock worker and his girlfriend. When Diane is shot, he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this is no simple theft gone wrong either. Megatron befriends Orion. He manipulates him into getting the information he needs.
Perfect.
Hello there! I'm Megatron. What's your name?
This is a cold, premeditated, vicious attack. The level of brutality of which was rare in the Generation 1 cartoon, and it needed to be. For the aerial bots to truly understand the horror that the Decepticons represent, they needed to see the damage that could be done. These murders would not necessarily have carried as much weight if it had been another Autobot soldier. It needed to be a remorseless, cruel act, and it was. And I have no idea how David Wise even managed to get away with this. I'm sure the argument of, well, they're just machines was said quite a few times. So how does this tragedy end for the aerial bots? Well, with Optimus Prime now leading the charge and the counterattack against Megatron, the aerial bots attempt to prevent Megatron's troops from stealing the fuel by blowing it up. But when they realise there's no way for them to escape in time, without hesitation they prepare themselves to make the ultimate heroic sacrifice, and are only saved at the last moment thanks to Wheeljack managing to repair the time machine in the future. The aerial bots have learned their lesson. They've learned how maniacal and evil the Decepticons can be, and at that point they are prepared to do whatever they can to stop them, and that includes risking their own lives. Now before I start closing this video down, I just want to talk a little bit about Optimus Prime. While this is absolutely an aerial bot spotlight episode, there's just as much focus given to Prime and his origin. Much like the aerial bots, we get to see him before the war, holding many of the traits we would never expect from our cartoon leaders. He's jealous, obnoxious, and impressed by power. But he's also headstrong and willing to defend his friends, even when it seems hopeless. As Alpha Trion says, there's a strong spirit within him. And just on a personal note, Prime gets, in my mind, the coolest moment ever.
You've caused enough destruction for one day, Megatron. I haven't even started. You? Who are you? Your worst nightmare.
Oh, and he gets this awesome moment.
Ratchet, Ironhide, keep it distracted.
Oh, and there's this awesome moment too.
That's what you think, Megatron.
The Autobots!
Take 'em.
Darn, he's awesome. I don't quite know how to end this video. Like I say, I can't remember the first time I saw this episode. It's always been there. It's wonderful, and maybe I've convinced you that it's great too. If not, maybe I've at least convinced you to go and check it out again. But let me know what you think about this. Tell me what your favourite episode is in the comments below. If you like this video, please consider giving the channel a subscribe and clicking the thumbs up. This is the first video that I've really done like this, and I don't know whether or not this is something that you enjoy or something you would like to see more of, so please do let me know. Anyway, this is David saying thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.